About our next guest and talk to our next guest, John Pikney, because you've got a book called Unsolved, Exploring the World's Strangest Mysteries. Thanks for coming in this morning, John. Good morning to you. Wow, that's some spooky stuff going on there, but your book is certainly an interesting read. What made you actually start delving into this side of things?
Well, it all started when I was 19 years old, actually, and I had a very vivid dream in which I was driving along a country road and it was dusk, rain was falling, came to the top of a hill, topped the hill, and there was a little green truck down below, and I stepped on the brakes and smashed into the back of the truck. So it was such a terrible dream. I'd never had a dream like it before. When I woke up, I still felt shaken, and that day my girlfriend and I were going to a 21st in the country. We'd never been to Bacchus Marsh before, that's in Victoria, and so it was dusk, and suddenly the dream began, just in detail as I dreamed it. And when I stepped on the brakes, sure enough, they didn't work. We went into the back of the truck, and the police tested the brakes and they said they were perfect, and I had aquaplaned on oil that was on the road. So somehow I realised that in that dream I'd seen in some way that about 20 hours ahead that oil would be deposited on the road. And that's what made me interested in this whole thing.
Wow, so sort of premonitions, and because Monique is in Wycliffe Wells, which is the UFO capital of Australia, they claim. You talk a lot about UFOs in your book. You mention a woman in WA who has had bad luck since she sighted a UFO. Tell us about her, and how common are UFO sightings in our country?
They're very common. I mean, I've interviewed thousands of people, and I'm one of the founders with Peter Norris, the lawyer, of the Victorian UFO Research Society. But the young woman that I spoke to in, I think it's Kojonup from memory, where she lives in WA.
Kojonup?
Yeah, Kojonup.
Yeah.
She was woken one night by her Rottweilers barking wildly. She thought there was a burglar, so she went to the window and looked out into the garden. There was intense blue light flooding the garden. Then it was so big, this thing that was in the garden, she didn't sort of see it as a thing at all at first. She just looked past it. Then she suddenly realised there was a new structure in the garden, as if builders had come in overnight. An enormous pyramid that was hovering. It was bigger than the house. Anyway, she stood there looking at it, very frightened, and the dogs were going berserk. And that was about it as far as she was concerned. And I asked her, as I'll normally do with people, I said, did you have any physical effects that came on afterwards? Because this often happens with UFO encounters. And she said, I hadn't thought that was connected. But she had had a long series of illnesses following this sighting. And the dogs also were extremely ill. One of them got diabetes, another had liver troubles. You often get these physical effects with UFOs.
The fascinating thing about your book, when I was reading it, I actually didn't know that you were Australian, and here am I thinking, you know, this stuff happens over there. But there is a link, there's an Australian link along the way, and the Iceman's Curse is an interesting one because it also involves the death of a scientist in Queensland.
It does. This was Dr. Dr. Loy, that's right. He was a molecular biologist, and he'd been one of many scientists who worked on the corpse of Ötzi, the Iceman, who was dug out of the Italian Alps. He'd been there for 53 centuries undisturbed. But as soon as he was taken out, an amazing thing started to happen, because scientist after scientist who was involved in either taking samples from him or photographing him, or the man who made a documentary about him, all of them died in rather odd circumstances. And so journalists began speaking about the curse of the Iceman, whether it's a series of coincidences or whether it's the same syndrome as the mummies, the Egyptian mummies, who, again, people who disturbed them after those long sleeps got into a lot of trouble. As you know, many people died as a result of dealing with the mummies.
Wow, all right. All things spooky and mysterious. John, thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time this morning.
It's a pleasure, man.
And if you want to read more, John Pikney's book is called Unsolved, Exploring the World's Strangest Mysteries. We'll have all the details on our website.
I'm pretty grumpy when I've been woken up after about an hour. Imagine 5,300 years. No wonder. wonder there's a curse.
Feeling a little spooked right about now.